Good evening, everyone. Let us start with a prayer. Prayer for the seven gifts of the Holy Spirit. O Lord Jesus Christ, who before ascending into heaven did promise to send the Holy Spirit to finish your work in the souls of your apostles and disciples, deign to grant me the same Holy Spirit to me, that he may perfect in my soul the work of your grace and your love. Grant me the spirit of wisdom, that I may despise the perishable things of this world and aspire only after the things that are eternal. The spirit of understanding, to enlighten my mind with the light of your divine truth. The spirit of counsel, that I may ever choose the surest way of pleasing God and gaining heaven. The spirit of fortitude, that I may bear my cross with you and that I may overcome with courage all the obstacles that oppose my salvation. The spirit of knowledge, that I may know God and know myself and grow perfect in the science of the saints. The spirit of piety, that I may find the service of God sweet and amiable, and fear, that I may be filled with a loving reverence towards God and may dread in any way to displease Him. Mark me, dear Lord, with the sign of your true disciple and animate me in all things with your Holy Spirit. Amen. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our session today. Last week, Miss May has already covered the seventh commandment, so that leaves us with just the last two, which are pending for the entire commandments to end, and that's Commandment 8 and 10. Okay, so we're going to start with Commandment 8. We'll get into all the different aspects of it. I'm not going to do a recap as such because Miss May already did that last week. So we'll kind of use more of the time for examples and situations, and we'll get into it. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So let's start with like a very simple poem that I think everyone's heard in school, which is Johnny Johnny. And I think that's something right from the time we're young, we've kind of learned not to be liars, right? But whether we like it or not, the moment something happens, especially when it's something to do with our siblings, they've broken something or made a mess of things which I have done or someone else has done, it's immediately like he did it. Point a finger, blame it. And sometimes our parents also will do that. If they don't want to talk to someone on the phone, they'll tell you, just say that mom's not here or she's left her phone at home and just answer and tell them that it's okay. And we come to think of it as, all right, you know what, it's fine. It happens. In fact, we've got great characters which are kind of completely based on lying. And the story goes, if you know Pinocchio very well, Jiminy Cricket was always that endearing force to him that kept telling him that you have to speak the truth and try to avoid him get into trouble. But little Pinocchio, if you know the story, he kind of got into a lot of troubles just because of his lying. I mean, with him, at least you could tell because his nose kind of kept growing every time he lied. But with us, it gets a little more tricky, and there's different aspects that come into play when it's lying. Okay. So, in terms of simple definition, if you look at lying, lying means consciously and intentionally speaking or acting against the truth. It's considered a form of violence and it introduces the seed of division and undermines the trust on which every human community is based. So, if you actually tell the truth, and this is something that Mark Twain says very kind of often in one of his books, he says that if you tell the truth, you don't really have to remember anything. Because as they say, when you lie, you need 100 more lies to kind of cover up what you've said. So try and avoid it. Okay. We'll move to the next slide. And I'll introduce you to someone over here. This is Jeannie. She's going to be with us through this kind of lesson because she's going to do a little bit of questioning, which normally, if we had students and we're doing an interactive session, we would have that. But since you're not around, we'll kind of introduce her and get her in the mix. Okay, so her first question is, what does our relationship with truth have to do with God? And we need to understand why truth is so important for us as Christians. Okay, before Jesus went for his crucifixion, the night before the crucifixion, if you want to call it that, he started explaining to his disciples that he was going to prepare the way for them. At that point of time, they did not understand what he was talking about because they were not very clear what's going to happen. He already knew what he was here for, what he was here to do. And he made the statement saying that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to my Father except through me. Okay. So at that point, they were a little unclear what's going to happen. He already knew Judas was going to betray him, Peter was going to deny him, but he was prepared because he knew very well that that's what he was here for. He knew that that was his mission. And he also says that when he's kind of dealing with Pontius Pilate, where he says that for this I was born and for this I have come into the world. There's a very interesting caption in your UCAT if you look at the section on the eighth commandment, where even Pope Benedict has said that indeed Jesus Christ is the personified truth who attracts the world to himself. The truth radiating from Jesus is the splendor of truth. Every other truth is a fragment of the truth that he is and refers to him. Okay, so just to reinforce, he says that he is the truth, the way, and the life. Okay, this is part of John chapter 14. We'll move to our next slide and we'll see why it is so important for us to have a relationship with the truth, to have a relationship with God. Now, think about it honestly. You would not like your friends to be liars, right? Would you be friend someone who doesn't tell you the truth or isn't honest to you? Truth is nothing but the basics, first and foremost, to act sincerely and honestly. You don't have anything to do with double dealings. Like you don't say or act very nice in front of someone, but behind their backs, you're kind of going ahead and backbiting or spoiling their name. There shouldn't be any hidden motives. If you're truthful, you will not have that. There is no hypocrisy, there is no flattery. It gets a little tricky, as they say, when you're kind of dealing with your friends to be very honest, but friends do appreciate people who are honest, and those are the friends that will last you through life. Okay, so you always need to remember someone who follows Jesus eliminates lies, falsehood, and pretense and ambiguity from his accomplishments in life and becomes transparent towards the truth. To believe is to become a witness to the truth. All our relationships, all our friendships, even love, which is the greatest of them all, is based on truth. No truth, no relationship. It's as simple as that. Okay. So let's move to the next slide and see what we have over there. And we'll talk about some of the sins that come against or come in the way of truth. Now, these images kind of speak for themselves. And I think the big question that Jeannie has over here is what should I do if I have lied, deceived, or betrayed someone? If you go to your UCAT, you'll actually get the exact answer for this question. And it is part of your questionnaire, which is coming next. So you'll have to either look through or find your answer in that. But what you need to understand is every time we break a rule or we lie, rules are set for us to follow. The moment we break it, the moment we go against it, we have to bear penalties, we have to pay fines, or in some way go ahead and reconcile the mistakes that we've done. And the same happens with truth as well. If we've deceived or betrayed someone, it becomes our responsibility to go ahead and fix it. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories as we go along to understand what impacts truth could have. But before that, you need to understand and probably take a minute and ask yourself, have you ever done these things? Okay. They always say girls gossip more, which is not really true because if you look at it, even boys are equally involved. Gossiping is not gender biased, pretty much everyone does it. And worse than that is the whole concept of backbiting. There's a very interesting concept of these ladies who always went for a kitty party. And one fine day or one event that they met for, everyone was very quiet. No one was speaking. So the restaurant manager got a little freaked out, like, what is going on? So he went to the ladies and he asked them, ma'am, is everything okay? Is the service fine? You all seem to be very quiet today and no one seems to be talking. And one of the ladies turns around and tells him, you know what? Today everyone is here. So you can pretty much imagine what they were up to when their kitty parties were on. The moment one person was missing, they had someone to talk about. But if everyone was there, they're all being nice. Okay. So watch out for those and think about times that you've probably done that towards your friend or impacted them. Okay. Gossip, backbiting, anything of that sort to be avoided as much as you can. So we'll talk about slander, which is the first one or the first type of uh, misrepresenting or misleading information about your friend that you could cause. Keen, could we move to the next slide and we'll share information about slander? So, slander is nothing but saying something in public or saying something about another person in public that could affect the person's future. Okay. Now, when you think about a small little gossip that you've started or a small little lie or joke that you've started off about a person and he's not aware of it because he was probably not present over there or he probably was not responsible for it and it's blown out of proportion. And nowadays, we don't need a lot of time for things to blow out of proportion because our social media pretty much takes care of it, right? One message forwarded to someone and your whole group, your whole clique, everyone has it. Okay. So I'll give you a little story and you can probably think of how far your messages can reach. There's a story of this old man who did not like this young neighbor who had moved in. to his locality, and he went and he started telling people that, you know what, he's a thief. Now, there was a case or an incident that happened, and the first suspect, because people had heard a lot about the rumor going around that this young guy who's moved in recently is a thief, he got arrested. Now, when he got arrested, obviously the legal system is going to look into the issue, try to understand what happened. And they realized that the young guy wasn't really responsible for anything. It was all lies. So when he got to know why he was arrested and why his name was spoiled, he went ahead and sued the old man. He tried to go ahead and put a case against him saying that this man has defamed me. So the judge called all these guys in and he kind of had the case and he had the hearing and he heard what the old man had to say. And the old man says, you know what? I just made a statement. I didn't make up anything or have him arrested. That was never my intention. I just told one person. So the judge heard him out, listened to everything the old man had to say, and then told him, you know what? Whatever you've said about this person, I want you to write on a piece of paper. And on your way home, I want you to tear that paper and throw it along. And tomorrow you are required to come to court and I will tell you what needs to be done. If you can do it, we'll kind of make your sentence a little easier. So this old man writes everything, takes the paper, goes out. On the way, he tears it up, throws it around, and he goes home. Very peaceful to come for the next day. And then he comes to the judge and says that, okay, what's the verdict? So the judge tells him, okay, the papers that you threw and tore yesterday, I need you to go ahead and collect them. He's like, are you gone crazy? Those papers are already gone with the wind. I can't get them back. And that's when the judge tells him it's the same thing with gossip or your slander. Whenever you say something about someone, it's already gone. Once it's left your mouth, it is already news and it could be ruining someone's impression very badly. So, the meaning of the story is very simple. We need to somewhere be masters of our mouth so that we are not slaves of our words. Okay, because then we get into a vicious cycle of trying to cover things up, lying, and we don't want to do that. It's better not to say something bad about someone if you're not sure, rather than say something and ruin someone's impression or their good name, in simple words. Okay, so with that, we'll move to the next part and we'll talk about the whole concept of gossip. Now, this is kind of made very, very dramatic and eventful by a lot of people now, because all of your talk shows, if you watch on TV, there's a lot of publicity that goes on even for those. And even our news channels are no less when it comes to gossip. Okay. Now, gossip is basically nothing but casual or unconstrained, uncontrolled conversations or reports about other people, typically involving details that are not confirmed as true. And as I said, those ladies at that kitty party enjoyed doing it. It was very normal for them. And sometimes we also do that. Like, you know what, you've heard this, or what's the latest gup, right? That's the first thing that we connect on, the gup or the gossip, if you want to call it that. So, how can it impact someone and what kind of the issues? How can we control it also, we want to know, right? So let's help Jeannie understand why do we gossip and how can we potentially control it. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so why is gossip poisonous? Let's look at that past first because we need to understand what is the issues of gossiping. Okay, so there are 7 reasons why gossip is so poisonous. We need to understand that. The first one, it feeds our own sense of superiority and you feel good about yourself. It may not always be the truth, but if you try to demean someone or gossip and wish bad about someone, it's like making you feel good, probably a very temporary satisfaction that you get. But what happens in the long run is once you continue gossiping, it kind of starts sowing distrust among your friends. If anyone watches The Big Bang Theory, there's a very interesting experiment that Sheldon and Amy decide to conduct with their friends. What they decide is they'll kind of let out a couple of truths and they'll let out a couple of lies and see which one actually travels faster, just to kind of measure how fast the lie travels versus how fast the truth will go. And surprisingly enough, and even Twitter has confirmed this data, that lies or fake news, if you want to call it that, or the so called gossip, will actually travel 6 times faster than the truth. Okay. So getting that false sense of superiority is not a good thing because, as I said, your friends stop trusting you. Most importantly, it harms your Christian values because, as Jesus has said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, you're not doing justice to that statement. you are kind of destroying your own integrity, because people stop believing you. They stop taking your word as the truth. They're not sure whether they should trust you going forward. So you need to be a little careful with that. Okay. Gossip, most importantly, ruins your relationships and also ruins your reputation, because once you get that tag of, you know what, this guy's a gossip monger, don't trust anything he says. Or probably if I tell you something, if I rely with a truth with you, or if I try to tell you a secret of mine, I don't know whether you're going to keep that to yourself or going to share it with your friends or people I don't want you to share it with. So you need to remember that, because what goes around comes around. As they say, if you keep gossiping, it will come back to haunt you. Your friends will stop trusting you. They'll stop talking to you for all you know, and you don't want that to happen, right? So let's look at what we can actually do to stop the gossip before it starts. Three very simple factors that you can do. The first thing that you probably need to ask yourself is, are you really indulging in gossip? Especially when you're talking to or talking about another person who's not present. Okay. Especially when your friend is not around and people are accusing him of something that you know isn't true. Stand up for him or her and make sure that that talk does not kind of go out of proportion, because something that is nipped at the bud is better than it getting into a snowball effect and reaching everyone, which is fake news. Okay. The second one is that will stop gossip before it starts. You can change the topic, or better still, keep your thoughts to yourself about the subject. Just because someone is saying something does not mean it is always true. We're going to look at a very interesting concept next that was given to us by Socrates, who was an ancient Greek philosopher. And it's a very simple filter that kind of comes into play. Okay, before that, the third pointer I wanted to call out is play the role of the advocate or the lawyer and stand up for your friend, as I already said. Okay. Now, I'll give the story about Socrates and the three filters that he talks about. Now, this actually goes along with the story where Socrates was once in the marketplace and was approached by an acquaintance, not even a friend, just someone who knew him. And this person walks up to him and tells him, you know what? I need to tell you something about your friend. So Socrates tells him, you know what? Before you tell me anything, I need you to kind of pass this whole three filter test, because only then will I want to listen to what you have to say to me. So he asks him firstly, is the information that you're going to give me true? So now this guy's a little hesitant. He says, no, and that's why I wanted to tell you about it. He's like, okay, you want to tell me something that you yourself don't know whether it's true or not. So how am I supposed to believe you? So he's like, okay, you know what? That does not pass my first test. However, is it good information about my friend or is it not? So he goes like, and that's the reason why I wanted to tell you. And Socrates stops him right there and says, see, you've not witnessed that event, nor are you sure that you've got it from a reliable source. And you're telling me that it's not good. So let's get to the third filter. And if you can answer this, I'll decide whether I want to know that or not. He says, is the information you are going to provide me going to be useful to me or no? And this guy goes, no, I just wanted to tell you just so you know. And Socrates turns around and tells him, you know what? You're giving me information that you yourself are not sure about whether it's true or not. Second thing is, you know it is not good information. And the third thing, you know that it's not going to be useful or make an impact or difference to my life. So why should I listen to you? And this pretty much works with all our cases of gossip. If you look at it, anytime someone tries to tell you something that doesn't hold true, or they've not seen or witnessed and isn't good about a person, maybe they're just lying. Okay. A very simple rule that you can use is use Socrates' three filters before you kind of get into that vicious trap of the entire gossip going on. Okay. So be careful and kind of don't go into that zone. Now, whether we like it or not, the other aspect that comes over here is the whole concept of the media. Okay. They kind of over publicize it. So you need to understand who are really your friends and your foes, because sometimes your friends also are kind of using social media out there, blogging or sending messages which you don't want. So be a little careful with everything that you share. We're getting to the next part of secrets. In the next slide, we'll talk about why we need to be very careful with sharing our information with others. As we said, everyone sometimes tend to have secrets. It's not a good thing to have, because the more honest and the more open you are, you don't need to maintain any secrets. Okay. But when it comes to certain things that you don't want to share, secrets are to be maintained, and you can kind of tell the person that you really trust. If the person goes and tells someone else, that's the end of it. You probably won't look at their face, or you won't ever trust them again. Now, the best kind of way to vent something out or share something that you want, is go for your confessions. Okay. The priests are bound by the confessional secret. They cannot at any point of time go ahead and reveal what's been told to them. There's this whole episode where Father Clifton always talks to us about you'll always find a longer line near the older priests, because people going for confession think that, you know what, if I go to the older priest, maybe he can't hear me that well. So I'll go and I'll mumble, I'll finish my confession, and I'll be done. And you don't want to do that. The entire idea of going for your confession is to go over there to kind of pour out whatever guilt, whatever thoughts that are kind of bothering you or eating you on the inside, that you start feeling better, that you kind of start making amends for what you've done. Because the entire idea for that confession is to kind of give that priest a chance to absolve you of what you've done. We'll talk a little bit about this towards the end because we've got one more commandment to cover. But before that, we'll kind of get into some very common misconceptions that we get when it comes to media. And media kind of has a very different way of presenting or spinning information on us. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So we need to be very mindful that social communication is kind of meant to establish justice, freedom, and solidarity in the world. However, now there's the whole scam, and if you know, there's a lot of issues going on, and there's a lot of news, if you look at it or if you watch it and read it carefully, about this TRP rating scam that is going on. You don't know who to believe and how much to believe when they're talking about it, because recently there was this whole hoo-ha about corona. Then they get another topic, they completely switch focus, and then they get something new. There's always something new that they'll kind of keep sharing. And you need to be very careful when you get these forwards, especially WhatsApp. They call this the whole university of WhatsApp now, because it has a cure on everything from corona to cancer. And when you get these messages, first thing that you need to understand is, am I reading something that is true, or is it something that is just being sensationalized and given to me to kind of just distribute blindly? People go ahead and use a lot of these channels for propaganda, and we need to be very careful of that, because when we forward messages to children or especially older people, they think that everything they receive is the truth. Okay. And you need to be very careful, because every message, especially when it is fake news, could lead to dire consequences or dire effects. There's this entire movie, if you get a chance, or this documentary called The Social Dilemma. It talks about how we are so intrigued or into our phones, where they say that we have literally become slaves to our own devices. We kind of believe everything that's happening. They've even kind of spoken about how we are now a commodity. Anything that you're getting free isn't necessarily free. They are kind of checking everything that you're doing. Every time you go to Facebook, every time you are on WhatsApp, every time you're on Google, everything that you do is tracked. And they use all of your activities to probably sell you things, get more of your time, probably even influence your behavior. There's this whole another documentary which goes called The Great Hack, which talks about how they use messaging and kind of target messaging to influence people even to vote. Okay, so you kind of don't know what your information is being used for. If you get a chance, Social Dilemma, do watch it. Okay, we'll move to the next slide and we'll kind of talk about some fun sides of this entire thing, because sometimes the information that we get is not necessarily bad. It could be funny as well, but we think it's true. Could we move to the next slide? Okay, so some ways to kind of help you spot fake news or understand what is fake versus real. Okay, has anyone had this glow in the dark burger? I'm sure you've heard of it, but never had it. This was one of a very interesting campaigns that came out in March, I think, of last year, where they were talking about a glow-in-the-dark burger from McDonald's. We know it kind of sounds very interesting and impressive, but it was nothing short of a little bit of a joke that they came up for April Fool. There was another one where a cab company started advertising mobile toilets, where they were like, in case you're stuck in a place and you have nowhere to go, you can call and our toilets will be there. And there was one more, even more interesting one on instant beer. Okay. So it spoofs, it's kind of funny. But when people start thinking about it as serious, people were getting into arguments and debates saying that, can this be done? Can we have this product? Is it optional? Is it something that will happen along? And we need to kind of get a little smarter in terms of spotting what is real versus what is fake. Okay, a few pointers over here that you could probably keep in mind going forward. First thing is, consider the source that you're getting in the message form. If it's something from a newspaper, it's something that's validated, you know that it's probably true, versus just some text that's randomly being sent to you. Read beyond and understand what the whole story is. Check who the author is and check supporting resources as well. Most importantly, don't forget to check the date of the message. There's a very funny saying of this kid who had gotten lost and his photo kept doing the rounds. The kid was found, but every time he went out to play, his neighbors kind of took him and left him back to his mother because they thought he was lost. Because the message of him being lost was still doing the rounds. Okay. So check your biases, check the dates, check whether it's a joke or not. And if you're confused or unsure of something, go to the experts. Ask people about the information. Find out before spreading fake news. Okay. With that, we'll kind of move to our next section that we have. And we are moving to the next commandment now. Now, as I said, this is the last set of commandments that we are doing because we've already covered everything else. So today, what we are doing is commandment 8 and 10. Commandment number 9 was already covered with you with when Father Clifton did the commandment 6 about thou shalt not commit adultery, and tied it in with you shall not covet your neighbor's wife as well. Okay, so with that, we're kind of getting now into the whole commandment 10, which is the last commandment that we have. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So just a little bit of context. It's the original biblical 10th commandment, which is kind of split into two. And that's the reason why you have commandment number 9, which says, do not covet thy neighbor's wife. And then we have commandment 10, which talks about, you shall not covet your neighbor's goods. Okay. We'll move to the next slide, please. Okay. So when we talk about the commandments, most commandments talk about an action or an outward doing. However, that completely changes when we talk about commandment 9 and 10. And we'll focus more on 10 today because it talks about the focus on the human heart. Unlike the other commandments which focus on outward actions, this one focuses more on what you're thinking, more on what your heart desires. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to one of the very important teachings or sharings that Jesus had before he kind of went on to kind of explain things during the Sermon on the Mount. I'll take you all through that. But the first thing is you cannot be clear in terms of what you're sharing, in terms of what you're doing, and kind of fake it. Now, at that time in the old day, what was happening is the Pharisees, if you want to take as an example over here, because they are kind of spoken about, they would make sure that they're doing a lot of rituals when it came to washing their hands, how they wash their hands, what kind of water they used. And it was so much focus on the external cleansing that they completely forgot the fact that their hearts are the first and most important thing that needs to be clean. So if you look at the statement over here in Matthew, he says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but the inside is full of greed and self indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. So, coming to the context of what it really means is that external display is not always good enough. If you don't have a clean heart, a clean mind, there's going to be a lot of issues and it's not going to really serve the purpose because you're not going to be able to fake it beyond a certain time. Okay. The question that Jeannie has over here is, but I was only thinking about it. How is it going to make so much of a difference? So let's see what the answer is to that. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So, first, before we kind of understand what the whole desire or the concept of desire comes in, we need to understand how these commandments kind of tie in with what the word covet means. Okay. So, covet comes from the word shamand, which is in Hebrew, and that is commonly translated into three words, which is either covet, lust, or strong desire. Now, while we have commandment number 6 completely saying that do not commit the act of adultery, this commandment 9 over here kind of forbids the desire for adultery. The same thing with the commandment about stealing, which we did last week, where we said do not steal. When we talk about commandment 10, it's forbidding the desire for you to go ahead and acquire or steal something, the desire to gain more material wealth. That's what it's trying to stop you from. Okay. We'll move to the next slide, please. Okay. So here we'll spend a little time on understanding the whole change or the whole concept of why this commandment is very essential and why Jesus kind of talks about this commandment when he's doing his Sermon on the Mount. Now, just a little context about the Sermon on the Mount. After Jesus came back from his entire temptations, if you know that, he started his work in Galilee. And when he started getting a lot of followers from the 10 villages of, or the 10 towns of Jerusalem, as they say, people from the other side of Jordan, they all started following Jesus. And he went up to this mount or this little hill where he sat and he preached. Now, take the time. if you can, and make sure that you read Matthew chapters 5 to 7, because that gives you a complete run through of the Sermon on the Mount. And the reason why this is one of the most important sermons or the most important teachings is because it talks about how Jesus is kind of explaining the new rules or the new laws to the people around him. Okay. So, a couple of things that are very, very important that come out during this sermon. The first one is the Beatitudes. In the 10th standard, you've done the Beatitudes of Jesus. We'll cover a few important ones as we go along, but that's one of the big things that comes out in this Sermon on the Mount. The other thing that he talks about during his Sermon on the Mount is that he's not here to change the old rules or the 10 commandments. He speaks about the law of Moses, and he tells people that there is a different way of doing things. He talks about the prohibition of desires rather than the outwards actions. Okay. So he speaks about everything from how you kind of curb your entire desires rather than get to a point where you're committing or you have to stop the action. Uh, Another very important part or a very interesting thing that comes out during the Sermon on the Mount is the Lord's Prayer. The Our Father is also a part of these teachings or this sermon, and the people were very happy with the information that Jesus was sharing because the way he shared information was very simple, very easy to understand. And that's the reason why it kind of is very critical that if you get a chance, please make sure that you read through Matthew 5 to 7 because you'll get a lot of information in a very, very simple manner to understand. Okay. We'll get back to the whole concept of not kind of envying people because there's a lot of problems that happens or a lot of sins that kind of are driven due to envy or the whole concept of covetousness. Okay. So let's kind of help Jeannie over here understand what does it mean to covet. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. These images kind of speak louder than words if you kind of look at what's displayed over here, and this is very, very common. Okay. The world that we are in today, the first thing you probably want to look at when anyone goes online, it's become like this big fad of making sure that your display picture, be it on WhatsApp, be it on Facebook, has to be the best. There are some people who are so kind of influenced and driven by it that they'll go ahead and check at every moment how many people have liked my image or how many people have liked my picture. And if someone gets more likes than me, I have a problem with that as well because then I'm getting a little more covetous towards that. If someone gets a new phone that's better than mine, is probably wearing something better than I am, or has a better car, a better bike, or a better set of shoes, for all I know, I may covet those things, which is not something that you should do. True joy, if you look at it, even with your friends, will only come when you are happy in the happiness of others. One of the biggest thing that comes out of covetousness is envy. Okay, we'll talk about a few more things that are caused when we talk about coveting and what it causes, but let's talk a little bit more about envy as we go along. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So envy, greed, avarice, theft, robbery, fraud, violence, injustice, and the desire to own what belongs to others are just some of the things that covetous needs to. Okay. And if you look at this image over here, it kind of literally displays what happens when you covet others. You kind of put on this whole fake persona that, oh my God, I'm like your best friend. I really like you. I'm very good to you. But as they have that concept of the backstabber, right? You don't know what's going on in the person's mind. You don't know when that person will turn and snap at you. And sometimes it becomes very important for us to realize who our true friends are, who are our real friends and the ones that care about us. Okay. So avoid kind of getting into a zone where you are being coveted towards your neighbor's belongings. Instead, try to be happy for your friends. Try to be happy for what you have. Now, one big thing to call out over here, if you're attending this session, just think about it. You are already way better and way more blessed than a lot of people out there. If you're watching this session, a few things that you definitely have. One is you have a smartphone or a laptop on which you're watching the session. Second is you're living in a house with electricity and internet connection as well, because of which you are able to stream this. And the fact that you are in confirmation means you've gone through a formal education, completed your 10th, and you're probably in college right now. Most of you are. But think about the others. Okay. So before we start coveting something better that someone has, count our blessings, count all the things that we have that others don't. There was this very popular campaign back in the day when I was growing up of Onida, where they spoke about neighbors envy, owners pride. Now, pride and envy, we said, are kind of problems that happen when we covet others. But we need to understand that it's not jealousy that is going to get us anywhere. It's only when we share in happiness and kind of are happy for others that we will get better. Let's move to the next slide because we'll kind of talk about the whole concept of being in a material world. Okay. Because everyone is so stuck up with that materialistic want that sometimes we tend to forget that there is a way for us to even decrease envy. Now, envy we need to understand is a capital sin. It refers to the sadness in the sight of another's good and desire to acquire them for oneself, even unjustly. When I wish harm upon someone, it is a moral sin. Okay. So you need to be a little mindful that just because someone is doing better than you or has something that you don't, does not mean that you don't have your own set of blessings. You need to be sure that you trust in God for what He's given you. You need to be content. Unfortunately, even in economics, when you'll kind of learn, and the first thing they tell you is that man is a social species with unlimited wants. It is kind of hard to believe, but we always can curb that expectation or that desire to want more. I think one of those most satisfied people I have seen in my life is my father. He's very content. He never wants anything more than what he has. He's just very happy with what he gets and he doesn't want anything more. And for me to kind of be like that, it's a little difficult because you always want something new, you always want something more, but not at the cost of trying to steal it from others or unjustly getting it from others. Last week, you spoke about, or we kind of discussed how you can kind of steal things away, and that is not something that we want to do. If someone has got a recognition, if someone has a great physique, for example, that person's probably worked towards that. He probably gets up, follows a good meal, healthy diet, does his routine workout, and due to which he is the way he is or she is the way she is. You cannot be jealous because, oh my God, look at that person, so much thinner than I am, or oh my God, look at that one. All envy, all jealousy, and it needs to kind of be decreased. So let's look at how we can actually decrease jealousy and help Jeannie answer that question on how can I decrease envy. Move to the next slide, please. Okay. So we need to understand that envy decreases when we rejoice in the accomplishments and gifts of others. Now, when our siblings, and I can give this classic example because we're always closer to people at home, when our siblings, the people we really like, get success, we're happy with them, right? And we need to kind of extend that with our friends and people we know as well. If we try to rejoice in the accomplishments and gifts of others, we kind of start getting better and happier in the joys that they have. We need to also believe the fact that God's benevolent providence for us is always there and He always has a plan for us. Okay. We need to kind of focus on true wealth or what is really going to make us happy because beyond a certain point of time, you can't acquire things. It kind of gives you only a certain amount of pleasure and then it's not fun anymore. They always have this concept of this guy on the cycle and this guy in the Mercedes. There are these kids playing outside and he's looking at them and he thinks to himself, oh my God, such a carefree life. I wish I was kind of outside in the free playing where these kids are. And those kids, on the other hand, are standing outside and looking at the car and going like, "Oh my God, how cool would it be to be in that Mercedes instead of playing over here?" So everyone is at their place where you need to feel happy for what the others are going through. And the most important part is we need to practice poverty in spirit. We cannot at any point of time believe that I know it all, I have it all, I'm the best. Okay, it's only through giving that we receive. We'll talk about a little story from the Bible which talks about the lady who went ahead and put the two pennies or the pence that she had in the collection box and she literally gave out of everything she had, whereas the people who were rich were coming and contributing, were giving in the extra money that they have. Now I'll go ahead and relate this to something a little more recent and a little more out there that you probably heard of and you know. We'll move to the next slide because that'll kind of tell you a little bit about the lady who went ahead and gave the gifts. Okay, because this is something that Jesus talks about even when he's talking about the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, I don't know whether you've heard of this person called Charles Finney. Charles Finney is the billionaire who went broke. You can probably go ahead and look it up on social media. On Nightshade also has done a little bit of a video on him and covers that. So a little bit about Charles Finney. So Charles Finney was this person who started and came up with this whole concept of duty-free shopping in the United States back in the 80s. And with the kind of business that they made and the amount of money that they earned, he was a millionaire. He kind of earned, worked his way up, and he was living the life. Basically, had everything that he could. And then Charles probably came to a point where he was like, you know what, I've kind of done everything I wanted. I've kind of acquired so much wealth. And he went on this giving spree. He started this entire foundation called the Atlantic Philanthropies. Please go ahead and read about it because it's very interesting to know, because he's influenced a lot of people in terms of giving. So, Charles Feeney, over his course of donating in the last 40 years, he has, out of his own wealth, given more than $8 billion in charity. Now, what makes it more interesting is that Charles Feeney was not one of the guys who made a big publicity when he donated. Now, a lot of people have that thing, right? They'll go ahead and publicize everything that they're doing. Oh, look at me. I went ahead and gave so much money towards this foundation and that foundation, and it's all over the news. Charles Feeney, on the other hand, was literally called the James Bond of philanthropy, but no one knew what he was doing, and he was not even making it so public. He was doing it through the help of his philanthropy that he was running. In fact, a couple of years back, he also started this foundation called the Giving Pledge, and it has a lot of rich people, including people like uh, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who kind of even contributed, and they've committed to or made a commitment that by the time or before they die, they are going to donate half the wealth that they've accumulated towards charity and towards philanthropic causes. So, as Jesus says, kind of blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. This person, Charles Feeney, is actually officially in September, just this year, declared broke. He has given away everything that he had, and he kind of has made it a mission to kind of not have any earthly belongings because he wants to go not rich anymore. He's the person who went literally from billionaire to broke and only out of giving, and he has absolutely no regrets about anything he's done. So, very interesting and very inspiring story. It's not something you just hear in the Bible. There are people who actually do that. Okay. Now, we need to kind of start recapping on where we've probably gone wrong, where we've made mistakes in our life, and what is it that we can do to make all of this better. We've spoken about the 10 commandments. We've probably figured that, you know what, at some point or the other, even I've gone wrong somewhere. So, how can I kind of go ahead and fix this for myself? Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So there is a good news, and that's what kind of makes us who we are, makes us Catholic. Okay. Christ continually renews the life and culture of the fallen man. He has given us the gift or the sacrament of reconciliation. I spoke earlier about confession. And I think when we get an opportunity, when things get normal, and all of you, before you'll go for your confirmation, are obviously going to get a chance as well. Make sure you take that time to kind of go through and pour out all of the sins that you've probably done, all of the mistakes that you've probably made. Okay, because the church, no matter how many intellectual priests or people tell you, it really doesn't matter. It's what you've kind of done and what you're going to go ahead and share that is going to make the big difference. Because only when you decide that you want to repent, you want to fix things, and you want to kind of improve, that's when things start getting better. I would like you to kind of take a little moment now and say this small little prayer with me. It's kind of here on the screen, if you can read this. It's Psalm 51, which says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me." Please say it when you get a chance again. And think about every time that you've wronged or you've kind of made mistakes that you want to kind of go ahead and fix. Because God gives us an opportunity to fix all the mistakes that we've done, and that's what we are here for. Okay. We'll move to the next slide. Okay. Now, Jeannie kind of got a lot of answers today in terms of what her queries were. She's understood a little bit about what not to do, how to avoid the whole bearing false witness against your neighbor or avoiding the whole covetousness that you have. But what do we yearn for the most, or what does someone need to seek for in their life? The biggest gift that anyone could have, or the biggest realization that someone could get, is if they look and kind of want to see God, if they kind of try to follow the Beatitudes. Okay. So for God to see Him, our Creator, our Lord, and our Redeemer, is an unending blessedness. We need to understand, if we kind of go ahead and make it very, very simple, the simple things that are being asked of us is first charity, and the second is the love of truth and faith. With that, we are at the end of our lesson today. I will like to thank you all for your time and have a good evening. Please make sure you submit your assessment sheets in time. Thank you very much.